Hello and welcome back to More Than a Lumpy Jumper. Today's episode is something a little different and a little deeper. We're exploring how the questions we ask ourselves shape our leadership, our choices, and the way we show up in the world. It's about tuning into the voice within, especially when life feels noisy, messy, or uncertain. And I'm joined by the wonderful Jane Galloway, founder of Quiet the Hive, a space where women reconnect with their ambition, courage, and voice. Jane is a coach, speaker, facilitator, an all-round spark maker. Or as someone once put it, a little bit of Jane Galloway will only create better things for those who are wise enough to work with her. And I couldn't agree more. Together, we are going to talk about permission slips, the power of self-trust, and the quiet leadership that begins when we start asking better questions of ourselves. So let's dive in to being the question. Jane, hello.
Hello, my goodness, what an introduction. That was so lovely. Thank you so much, Bobby. It's such a delight.
It's my absolute pleasure. But I've only said the tiniest amount about who is Jane Galloway. so the microphone is yours for you to tell us a little bit more about yourselves and what brings you here to be the person that I'm going to talk to about being the question.
Okay, my goodness me. How do you condense 49 years? As you said, I'm the founder of Quiet the Hive, and I like to describe myself as someone who works with women particularly to help them eventually reach their end of days going, holy cow, what a ride, rather than I wish I'd been brave enough to, or if only I had the strength to. So that kind of sums up my vision for the work that I do. That's what I want the women I work with to feel like. I want people to trust themselves a bit more and be a little bit braver and find the joy in life by creating a life for yourself that is guilt-free and on your own terms, because to quote Mary Oliver, we only have this one wild and precious life, right? So what are you going to do with it and how are you going to make it count? So I am a coach. As you said, I'm an award-winning coach. I've been coaching for 10 years. ILM 7 qualified. So all that means is you're in pretty good hands with me. And so coaching is all about the questions, right? And the power of the questions we ask. So I'm really excited for us to explore the concept of questions and about how they shape what we do and how we think about what we do and how it makes us better leaders or actually just better equipped to navigate our own way through our life and what we want that to look like. I set up Quiet the Hive in 2019. And it was always alongside my full-time NHS career. So I was in the NHS for 24 years. And a couple of years ago, I stepped away from that. And I now do Quiet the Hive full-time, which is an absolute joy. So I do a mix of corporate keynotes, masterclasses, presentations, but I also run my own programs as well. And I do one-to-one coaching. So that's kind of a bit about me, I guess.
I love it. And I love the title, Quiet the Hive, because I think that sort of like is really the segue into some of the stuff that we want to talk about. Because I think, as I was saying in the introduction, those times in life when things are noisy, messy, uncertain, and I'm guessing, although I've never actually asked you this question, but the quiet the hive is the hive mind where things are just buzzing around and you've got to try and clear it out a little bit, I guess.
So I'm glad it obviously does what it says on the tin, because that is exactly it. So it's about quieting that inner buzz, whether it's the inner critic or the mental load or just dealing with all the stuff and all the internal dialogue that's going on all the time. And also my nickname is Janie Bee and has been since I was little. So it was always going to be something to do with bees. But yeah.
Oh, well, that's quite a relief. That would have been pretty awful if you'd gone, no, Bobby, what the hell are you talking about? It's something entirely different. And you said something in your intro there that I was thinking, that whole element of being with the questions. And you are aware that I coach as well. And it's that reflective practice, isn't it? And I think that a lot of the time, I'm probably jumping ahead a little bit, but I just want us to park this because I think it's something that we'll come back to in the conversation, is that we don't give ourselves often enough time to reflect. We're like banging around with the next thing, that totally busy life, the very busy mind, etc., where trying to find that space for a pause is where the questions can come. And I suppose I'm using that as a sort of like a segue into other things because, you know, your evolution from, oh my goodness, the NHS to actually setting up
Mhm.
Quiet the Hive, you
Mm.
must have been in lots of questions for yourself. And I'm wondering what some of those questions were whilst you've actually moved from a very different form of life to now running your own business and your own programs.
Yeah, so for me, it all kind of happened. It was almost like I woke up at 40 and things changed. And Bobby, you'll know from conversations that we've had before that I can be a little bit sweary. Is
Oh,
swearing
if you
permitted on
if you
the
fucking don't, I don't know what's the matter with you.
podcast? Okay, all right. So in that case, let's say that it was almost like I woke up and I was 40, and suddenly the voice that popped into my head was, "What the hell are you doing? You know, you don't need to give a shit about what other people are thinking about you all the time." And around the same time, my mum got a diagnosis of secondary breast cancer. I just kind of was discovering that I was in a marriage with a lovely, lovely man who I am still friends with, but I felt very lonely and it wasn't what I wanted. And I could have stayed on the same path and everything would have been fine, but I didn't really want fine. I want extraordinary. You know, I'm very aware that we get to do this once. And so why wouldn't you want to do it in a way that feels
Yeah,
good and isn't just about doing it for other people, but actually doing it for yourself as well? So there were two pivotal moments that created Quiet the Hive for me. One of them was so at the time I was working as the deputy director for the London Leadership Academy, which was an amazing place to work. It was so innovative and risk taking, and it was part of the NHS, and it was about supporting and developing leaders in the NHS. And our big thing was about giving people the time and space to think, which is what you've just alluded to about how we don't do that because it feels like such a luxury to take time out to think about things and to reflect on things. And actually, that shouldn't be the case. That should just be something that we do,
absolutely.
right? That should just be what we do as a regular thing. So I was working there and I had run a session for a Royal College, and I was telling a friend of mine, I was out for dinner with a friend, and she said, "You need to come and do that at my organisation." And I said, "Oh, I'd love to, but you know, I can't because you're not an NHS organisation, so I can't come and do that for you." And she said, "No, you need to set up your business and you need to come and do it and I will pay you to do it." And people had been incredibly generous with their feedback and their support of me. But that was the first time that someone said, "I'll put my money
Yeah.
where my mouth is." And I'm ever grateful to her because I kind of went home and registered Quiet the Hive as a business. And then the other thing the real reason that it came about was that I was coaching one week. So I was coaching or mentoring a different woman every day that week. And every single one of them sat in front of me and apologized for taking up space, felt like they were failing as parents or as employees or as managers and I sat in front of each and every one of them and I thought, you are incredible and I don't understand why you can't see it. You're just like, I am in awe of you in the truest sense of the word. I just thought they were all incredible and they really struggled to see that for themselves. So my flagship program actually came before anything else because I got them all in a room and I thought, if as women, we're really, really good at saying, "Come on, Bobby, you can do this. Why wouldn't you? You're amazing." But we're not so good at doing it for ourselves. So part of what I wanted to do was to get these women in a room together so that they could hear more than just me say, "You're incredible and you're capable and you are more than worthy of going for and getting what you deserve." So the questions that came from that were really interesting because for me it was about, how do I get the most from life in a way that feels good for me, that is in service of my values and what I want to achieve as
I
well.
love that.
So those were some of the things I was exploring.
I think the thing that lands with me as well when I'm thinking about those ladies that were sat in front of you as well, and I think that this is the reason why I wanted us to be in conversation about questions rather than statements or mantras. Now, there's a
Yeah.
place for those, but I was just sitting here as you was talking, and I thinking, you know, statements or mantras can sometimes feel quite fixed, whereas the
Yeah.
question always keeps things open. Does that make
Yeah. That's
sense?
really true. It makes perfect sense. And actually that's really interesting, isn't it? Because that's how we grow and shape and shift, by constantly revisiting our thoughts and our opinions and our feelings. And actually it's quite, I think it, we get stuck with friendships, for example, because we think, well, this person is my friend and has been my friend for years, therefore they must remain my friend. And we assume that things are fixed, and they're not. And actually that's what's brilliant about using sometimes the same set of questions at a regular point of time to check in with yourself and being open to what comes up. We are allowed to change. We're not the same person we were yesterday, let alone 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. So why do we assume that things won't change and shift? And questions allow you to tap into that.
I love that. I think that's evolution piece. I mean, I sort of, I often refer to myself as an everyday learner, and I think that's what questions keep alive. I just a little sideshow bit. I was just mindful of doing an emotional autobiography on a course that I was actually on, and I did it some years back. And then I decided from the course that I was on that I was going to, this was when I did my somatic work, I was going to go back and become a somatic coach. So on another course with the same people, I was asked to do the emotional autobiography again. And I think it was then that I realised how much things have shifted. I could have just dusted. It's like that dusting off the same one, going, "Oh, I've done this before. I'll just hand that one in again." But actually going through the same process, and it was entirely different because the situation had changed, the environment had changed, I'd changed. So I think you're absolutely right. I love it, especially with friendships or any people. I think who said it, but that always be around like you're meeting them for the first time every time you meet them again, because you're not the same people that you were the last time that you met, even if they're friends from a long time ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And isn't that interesting that we get, it's the same with some of the stories we're told as kids, right? So the narratives we get given as kids. So for example, the one that always comes to my mind is I was always told that I couldn't do art. I was no good at art. And I remember this one time I tried really, really hard and I was really proud of what I produced. And the teacher gave me a very low mark, like 1 out of 10 or something, because he said I'd traced it. Oof. And I hadn't. I'd risen to the challenge. And at that point I thought, well, I can't, my fixed narrative became, I am not creative. And it wasn't I can't recreate art by copying it from something else. It was the I am not creative thing. And that lived with me for so long. And now what I do as an adult, so every year I take my kids, for the past 4 years, I've gone to this amazing place called Forest in Cardigan, and they have a festival called Gather every year for 2 weeks in the summer holidays. And you go along and you do creative classes. And I make sure I go to a drawing class, at least one, every time I go. And I'm always delighted with what I produce. And slowly but surely, I'm reclaiming and shaping and shifting that narrative. But sometimes we claim these stories that we are given and we hold on to them and we don't question them. We just accept that that's true. And it's normally because it's a story that's been given to us either repetitively or by a figure of authority when we're younger, and we accept it as the truth. And actually, when I start questioning myself about my creativity, I know that that's absolute bullshit. Actually, I've just launched on Substack, which some listeners may be familiar with, a collection of my poetry. So I'm writing poetry, which I've done for years and years and years and years and years. But it's only in the last sort of year or so that I've begun to tentatively share it, because I'm questioning the story that was set in my head about being creative.
Oh, that is amazing. And I need to get onto Substack because I want to see your poetry. If I'd have remembered, I'd have made you bring one to actually recite on this recording. Too late for that, maybe another time. Can you actually articulate some of the questions that you have asked yourself whilst you've been in that space of re-evolving to creativity?
I guess it's questioning what my understanding of creativity is. So what is being creative? And that was a big one, right? Because that is, and actually some of this has come from my youngest son. So he is very much of the opinion, like I was, that he can't draw, therefore he's no good at art. Right. And when I go to parents' evenings, that is not the story that his art teachers have told him or me. So what he can't do very well, like me, is look at something and make a faithful reproduction of it, which is what we see hanging in the art galleries, right? In the traditional classic art galleries, we see these incredible artistic copyings of real life put down in incredible ways onto paper. And that's what he and I can't do. But what I hear his teachers say are talking about when he's doing, I don't know, collages or interpretive art or modern art, or his use of colour, or how he interprets something that's in front of him and puts it on the paper in a way that's different when he's invited to do it in a different way rather than a faithful representation. So some of the questions I've been asking myself are listening to the feedback he's been given and asking myself, okay, well, what is art? What is creativity? There's a brilliant book for anyone else who's grappling with this topic, am I creative or not? There's an amazing book called Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert, which I try and read once a year, which is about the fact that everyone is creative, and it comes in different forms, and it's the parameters we put around it and the interpretations we put around it that make us feel like we can't do it. So the questions, I think, that are not just about creativity, but about all sorts of things are, well, what is my understanding of this thing that I'm grappling with? What do I think it is? What have I been told it is? What do I automatically accept it is? And what do I actually think it is? And what's the evidence around me? So I think when we think about, I don't know, development, leadership, when we think about stepping into a space that is a bit scarier, a bit bigger than we're used to inhabiting, you know, towing the line of our comfort zone and things, it is about asking yourself, well, what do you want to get out of it? Why do you want to do this thing? And sometimes when we come up with a bigger why, well, it doesn't remove the fear, but we can bypass the fear, right? So my vision with Quiet the Hive, as I talked about at the beginning, is about making sure that the women I work with, and I'm not sure yet how I'm going to measurably verify my success. It might take a little while, but it's about helping people get to their end of days thinking, holy cow, what a ride. That's my big why. So when I am scared about pitching for business, or when I am about to speak in front of 2,500 people, as I thought I was going to be speaking to a couple of hundred people, and I signed on online and there was just over 2,700. That was a bit scary. But it's keeping your why in mind that can help you be braver, right? And can help you get past those sticky points. So my art for my creativity was, why do I want to do that? Well, because actually partly I want to prove myself and my ex-art teacher, I want to prove them wrong. I want to prove that past narrative wrong. So thinking some of those questions about thinking about what's your understanding and why do you want things to shift, I think those can be really insightful. And those are things that will change over time as well.
That's wonderful. And what I liked about when you said the bigger why, and the other word that I liked about what your teachers are doing for your son was the word invitation, invited in. It's like when you have others who are inviting you in, it's how you turn that into inviting yourself in to the bigger why. But I loved the questions because they're spacious. It doesn't shut things down. And again, we're back to that. Don't make statements, make the questions, because then you've got space to explore, be curious, whatever that might be.
Yeah.
I think it's all right. Yeah. Leads me on nicely to one of the other things that I think is very restrictive that we need to turn into questions, which are shoulds. And I tell you, I have to tell you this, because when you sent your brilliant bio sheet over with the snappy short, the long, the really long, or however it was however you was describing
all the different versions of the bio.
It's like, again, because we also have had that time when I've coveted your Instagram creativity as well. So I've always seen you as very creative since I've met you. But I go, I remember messaging you and saying I should have done this, and I said it to myself yesterday about, I really should have a bio sheet like Jane's. But should is quite debilitating, I think. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. It automatically puts that barrier. Yeah. By the way, I completely nicked that sheet off someone else, and I can't remember who it is. If I remember who it is, I will give them a shout out. But someone was guesting on my podcast and sent me across something similar, and I immediately replied and said, "This is genius." And she said, "Borrow it with gay abandon." So I did. But
exactly. So whoever you are, thank you very much, because I am now nicking it too, and mine will be made forthwith.
I am certain she would give you her blessing for that. But yes, you're right about shoulds. They automatically become a barrier before we take it any further. I should do this. I mean, you can't even hear the energy or excitement in that, can you? So every year I run something called the retrospective, and I do it in mid to late December. And it's about looking forward to the new year based on the energy and joy of the old year. So I do not like New Year's resolutions because I think they are based on shoulds and societal expectations. Oh, I should lose weight. I should run more. I should do this. I should do that. I should write the book. Actually, you're never going to do that because that's not based on something you want to do. When we think about, well, where is my joy and energy coming from? That's what I need to focus on. That's what I want to focus on. That's inviting me in to focus on it because I'm really excited about that. And the retrospective is the most popular thing I run all year. It's a really low ticket thing, but people come back and do it year after year because it works, because you're focusing on, well, actually, what brought me joy and pleasure last year? And how am I going to bring that into next year? So instead of having these set of New Year's resolutions that are punitive, we have a set of intentions that actually feel expansive and exciting and make you want to lean into them. And I think that's the difference between should and could, maybe, or want, or getting excited about things. I think that's really the difference for me. I think shoulds are just their own blockers.
And I think there's a couple of things there. It's like should. It's a bit like me going, oh God, I loved Jane's bio thing. Now, of course, I am going to go off and do it, as I've already said. But I should have got one, and that's not me discerning who I am versus the wonderful Jane Galloway. So what do I need it for? So in actual fact, if I went back into a question rather than a should, well, what do I need it for? And why do I need it? So I also like the thing that, especially from the retrospective, I can imagine what I envisage with the people, because one, it's like an accountability element to it as well. That if they've come back year on year, they've already decided in that spacious place that they're going to come back at the end of the year. So what they're actually setting themselves up for that year is to have things to talk about as to where their energy and joy have been.
Yeah.
So it is the intention, but you're looking at the right things. So questions get you looking at the right things. The intentions get you. It saves the space for being in that. Whereas, as I say, the should is a closing down element, I think. Sorry, you were going to say something else there.
No, I was just thinking that I should have this or I should do that. We so often, and I think that this is, I think, exacerbated through social media. I think social media is amazing for so much stuff. However, we so often compare our insides with other people's outsides. And I think we do that more on social media. So I remember you and I having a conversation offline in the DMs about, I've seen that you're doing this and how can I do that? And the response was, oh my God, I don't feel like I'm doing that at all. And people quite often say to me, oh, you're all over social media, you're doing it so well. And yet I consistently feel like I'm failing at social media and not doing it well because I never know what to say. And it's really silly, isn't it? Because we do this thing where we look at other people and we think they're so successful, they're X, Y, and Z. I'm running a workshop next week to counter exactly this. So many people who run small businesses like you and I, Bobby, have this moment of looking around and going, why the fuck am I bothering? This is ridiculous. Everyone else is like successful and flying and popular and selling out and paying themselves millions. And why am I even bothering? So for me, I wrote an article this year. So I started paying myself from Quiet the Hive. Bearing in mind, Quiet the Hive has been going for 6 years in January. I started paying myself in April last year. That was the first time I'd paid myself. And I wrote an article about that because I had a conversation with my ex-husband. We meet up at the rugby try lines every week to chat because he's coaching the boys and the boys are at rugby. So every other week we're both there. And he was really surprised that I had only just started paying myself. And when I say paying myself, I was paying myself £700 a month. That was it. And he was really shocked because he assumed from what he'd seen and what his understanding was of small business and coaching and being asked to do corporate speaking that I was probably absolutely raking it in. And I think people look at small businesses and they think, wow, they're making millions. And the thing that really pisses me off, Bobby, are those messages that come out on social media. Oh, you just need to follow me and
Oh my
buy my
God,
thing,
don't start me.
and you can make 7-figure months every month consistently. And I think, do you know what? I call bullshit, because if that was the case, they wouldn't be on social media selling that, because they would be making their millions and they would have trademarked this formula and everyone would be buying it and everyone would be doing it. And it's just not right, because what works for you doesn't necessarily work for someone else, and vice versa. And it's a should, isn't it? It's that, oh my God, I should buy into this. I should be doing this. I should be on socials every day. I should be. And actually, it's the shoulds that really bring us down and make us feel exhausted and make us feel like we're failing, because they come from comparison.
Absolutely. And yeah, we won't get into a soapbox moment about those elements, because I just work out how to just not see them or delete or whatever it might be, because I don't know about you, but from moving from the jobs that I was doing to setting up my own business, I knew that I was going to have to right size life. But as a result of right sizing life, it feels a damn sight more spacious than the hamster wheel that I felt like I was on before. But I think that all of us have it living in us, that you can really easily get yourself into a should mode, especially when you're working for yourself. If you don't have the things like your programs have, or the networks that we are part and parcel of, which is how we met, etc., to keep us all a little bit more grounded in what the hell we're doing here and why we're doing it.
Yeah. And that's part of the reason I'm really keen to have these conversations, is actually by me writing the article and saying how surprised my ex was about my pittance. I had so many people saying, thank you so much for sharing that, because I thought I was the only one. Or keep going, because you will get there, because I've got there now, but I remember what that was like. Or all these things. I mean, I think the more we talk about our failures and our fuck ups, the more other people can go,
it's not just me. Exactly. Well, Bridget, my lovely co-host, normally here, and I think that was one of the reasons that we started this off, because we seem to have had plenty of stories to talk about when it didn't go quite right, and less so when and of course it has gone right, and there's so much learning in all of that, but I often say to my clients, there's more learning when you've been swimming around in a bucket of shit, for want of a more technical term, than when it's all going right. If
oh my God,
if you can actually be in those questions and know that you're not going to be swimming around in it forever, but even if it's after, we're back to that reflective mode of, oh my God, I don't want to be there again. So what occurred? What can I do different? Those sort of like what questions to turn it into the why that you've been describing.
And I think it's really important to point out, it's not about being having a Pollyanna approach to life, right? So I am an optimist. I'm just a born optimist, I think. But it's not about thinking, la la la, everything's fabulous, everything's great all the time. Oh, I'm just going to reflect and that's fab. The real tough stuff does happen, and it's okay to sit in the self-pity of that for a bit, to be in it and to feel all the feelings and experience them and realize it's hard. It's not instantly, oh no, I've made this dreadful mistake. Well, don't worry, we're going to learn lessons from it, because actually the moment you make the dreadful mistake, that's when your stomach churns. That's when you feel physically sick. That's when you start berating yourself. And that is natural, and it's absolutely what's going to happen. But it's about actually giving yourself a moment and then thinking, okay, let's think about reframing. And I'm a big one for reframing, I think. And I think asking the questions helps. But I think you and I, Bobby, we're really fortunate, because we are trained, qualified coaches who know the power of questions. If you're someone who is new to this stuff, actually it feels quite scary asking the questions sometimes, and you're a bit worried about what might come out. And I think the reason we make ourselves so busy all the time is because stopping and thinking and processing some of this stuff is really hard and quite scary and can feel really
absolutely, and especially, which is a nice segue, is to turn it just for a moment, because I mean all the stuff we've been talking about is life, whatever situations, and this all that we've talked about includes leadership as well. But if we I just want to sort of like hone in on the leadership piece, because I think that's where it gets super lonely. I had a number of roles where my husband would sort of like amusingly say to himself, oh, here she comes, everybody's work wife. But I think because of the type of roles I actually had, I was more like a conscience for the organisation sometimes, especially with the chief exec or with on the senior team, because I had, as you say, you know, when you're qualified in these questions, you are the person who's sort of like dragging the elephant out of the corner and going, hang on a minute, there's an elephant here and we need to discuss it. So
And no
nobody
one likes that,
it.
do they? So sometimes it's not a popular
Absolutely
place to
not.
be.
I learnt even before I realised I was learning about being curious, asking questions, etc. When I think about a number of leaders, though, and as we're saying, this stuff is hard, you know, and I put the questions with self-trust. So especially if you are putting yourself into a leadership position where you're leading organisations, you're leading teams, whatever it might be, there has got to be, in my view, a very inherent sense of trust for yourself in order to trust everybody else. You know, you've got to be clear about where you actually are. And that has to come from being in those questions or trusting yourself enough to don't know or asking for help, all of those sort of like elements. So I'm just wondering if there's stuff that you've worked with leaders of examples where it's been clear about what shift they've been in order to get into the questions, rather than that persona that so many leaders that I've worked with or experienced, where they think they've got to have it all of their shit together and it all going on, and nobody needs to know that they're really absolutely falling apart on the inside.
So I think a lot of our leadership behaviours and how we act as leaders comes from role modelling, right? So if we think about in the past 50, 100 years, who are the leaders that have been at the top? Who are we learning from? What are the examples we've been set? We're still operating at a time where, in living memory, you know, women had to get approval from their fathers or husbands or whoever to get mortgages and things, let alone enter the workspace. That was almost accidental because the world wars left a gap where women had to go to work, and suddenly we were ruling the roost a lot of the time. But I think the role modelling we get is you have to behave a certain way to get to the top. So, for example, if I think back to, so my last role in the NHS was head of flexible working for NHS England. And if I think about some of the questions we were tackling there, you know, you couldn't be a chief exec or a board member unless you were willing to work all the hours God sends. And still, society expects women to, and do pick up caring responsibilities and parental responsibilities in a way that makes it really hard for us to work in those sorts of ways. So there's a lot about the role modelling we're given as to the leaders we see. But I think I've been very, very lucky that I've worked with some incredible leaders. I've also worked with the shittiest ones as well. But I've learned more from them about how I don't want to lead, and actually about tapping into my bravery and challenging some of being in the position of being the one who isn't particularly liked because you're asking the questions. But people forget that that's what you're paid for. You're paid to actually drag the elephant out the corner of the room sometimes. And by not doing that, you're not being true to your values or your own leadership values. So that can be hard. But I've been very lucky. I've worked with some amazing leaders. And one woman who was my manager, the example that she gave me, which I'd really grappled with until then, was she was brilliant at saying, I don't know. What do you think? If she didn't know the answer to something, she would ask questions about it. And she wasn't afraid to say, I don't know. And I think that was the biggest lesson I learned as a leader, is you do not have to have all the answers. You're far better off having a good range of questions than you are having all the answers. Because if you've got all the answers, what on earth are you hiring brilliant people around you for?
I couldn't agree more. And I think that's where a lack of commitment, accountability comes from, if it's that directive, because I know the answer, so I'm just going to tell you what to do.
Exactly. And I think the biggest thing you can have in terms of self-trust for leadership, there's something about, so the thing I get told most when I was looking at it and spending time working in the leadership arena was that consistency is really important to people in a leader. People want leaders who are consistent. You don't want to be treading on eggshells. So you need to know what you stand for. You need to be willing to put that aside sometimes, or to be questioned about it, or to think about different ways of doing it. But I think you need to to grow that self-trust, I think knowing what you stand for, knowing what you can be consistent about is really important. And also knowing what you can be fluid about as well, and knowing your values. So in my career confidence program, one of the things we do is look at what your values are. Because actually, when you know your values, it becomes much easier to think, well, what are the battles that I'm willing to pick and what can I let go? And you cannot expect people to trust you if you don't trust yourself. So knowing more about yourself, knowing more about your values, what kind of leader you are, what kind of leader you want to be, where you get your energy, where your strengths are, and picking up other people who fill the gaps where your strengths are or who are complementary to your strengths. I don't mean they tell you they're lovely. I mean that they fit in the bits that you don't have, and vice versa. That can be really powerful, I think. But you've got to be able to trust yourself before your teams can trust you. And that's hard, right? That's really hard, because quite often we're landed in leadership positions. We're not trained up for them. We're dumped in them and expected to figure it out for ourselves. And actually, that's why sometimes people really struggle in roles of seniority, because they've been amazing at what they've been doing. And so people see their potential and go, you're brilliant, let's promote you. And then they get into that space and they fall apart because they're not supported to land well in that space. And that's where coaching can be brilliant, can't it? So when you start a new role, or you're acting into your next promotion or whatever it might be, having a coach around you who can help you ask some of those questions is invaluable. They won't have the answers for you. As coaches, we're not going to give you the answers. I know that, Bobby, I wonder whether you're a bit like me. When I trained to be a coach, I had to physically sit on my hands to not give the answers, because, someone who likes to chat and likes to help people and likes to support people, but you have to let people figure it out. But the value of coach is that they can ask you the questions that will really help you unlock some of that stuff in your leadership development and your leadership.
Absolutely. And they are my, I love all my clients, but my favourite piece, because having been in organisations, watched this over and over again, supporting people who are moving from that managerial to the leadership position. Bridget and I did a episode recently on the distinctions about management and leadership. The thing that I like about that your role model that you talked about, that I don't know, what do you think? Again, we're back to space, because one, they've got enough trust to be able to just go, I don't have the answer, but they're giving, for want of a better word, and you can see where the segue is going to go, but they're giving permission for other people to ask questions as well. So that you get into the question space, and which unlocks a whole host of other things, rather than this directive linear A to B, which nothing ever is.
No, exactly. And what she did by asking those questions was indirectly give me permission to say, I don't know either. And that was massive, because that, I think, is where you fall over, is when you think, oh my God, I need to have all the answers, and I don't. So therefore I'm crap at my job. And that's not the case, because not everyone has the answers. And we may think we have the answers as well, but we don't all have the best answers or the right answers. That's where having a diverse group of people around you who you invite into the conversation, that's where you get the best answers.
And I used to say to my team sometimes as well, why do I need to do all the work? It's just
a good question, Bobby. I like that. Sadly, it doesn't work when you're in a small business.
No, because that's all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, now I have got to do all of the work. But I would just mischievously say it to my managers when they're saying, why are you giving this to me to do? Because I think you can do it, and this is a little bit of a stretch goal for you. Whereas they often probably thought I was completely insane, thinking, well, I don't know, because I would make the joke that, well, I don't want to do it, so I've given it to you to do. And so I was like, I'm really not being lazy. I want to see if you can do it or not, because I think you can.
But that's another permission slip, isn't it? That's another thing. By giving them pieces of work that you can see that they can do, but they can't see it for themselves yet, you're giving them permission to stretch into that. But also, I think the other big thing we need to give permission for, and I think this is not done well and not done often, certainly in some of the areas I've worked, is we need to give people permission to fail. It needs to be okay to fail, because that's where innovation comes from, right? And if we don't give people permission to fail, they won't take risks. And if we don't take risks, we don't climb to new heights. And I think that's a scary thing as a leader, is to give people permission to fail. But that is what sets a culture up of honesty. And also, we know, for those people who might be listening who've got massive NHS background, we know that that's where some of the huge failures have come from. It's when people feel too scared to speak up. because you're not allowed to fail. And that's where some of the huge errors have
And
come in.
there's the permission slips that you want to be given, such as that.
Yep.
And then permission slips that would be great to give to yourself, like permission to try. Taking that one step just to see, rather than
for sure.
and equally permission not to try, because there's always a choice, right?
Yes, and do nothing is legitimately a choice. That's why it's always on an options paper, right? Do nothing is always the first option. It's completely legitimate as long as you make an active choice and you understand that you're making an active choice around that.
Absolutely. And the rationale, if necessary or not.
Yeah.
Are there any permission slips that you've got written for yourself, stuck up around your walls or anything?
Well, I'm at my desk at the moment. I'm looking. I do have a line of Post-it notes. Some of them tell me what my brand colours are, so I can remember the codes for them. But I do have two things up at the moment. One, every year I choose a word of the year for Quiet the Hive and for myself. And so I've got vibrant written on a Post-it note in front of me at the moment, which is my word of the year for Quiet the Hive. So when I am struggling with something, I have a little look at that and I go, okay, permission to be vibrant. I want it to feel vibrant to work in and with Quiet the Hive. So what am I doing that does that? But the other one I love is from a book called Playing Big by Tara Moore, which I should get commissioned for because I have bought so many copies and recommended it so often. I love this book so much I trained to become a Playing Big facilitator. But the quote from Tara Moore that I really love, that is on a Post-it in front of me now, says, "Playing big is being more loyal to your dreams than your fears." So permission to go for your dreams rather than get stuck in your fears.
I love that. Say it again.
Playing big is being more loyal to your dreams than your fears.
More loyal to your dreams than your fears. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. Which I adore. And then the other quote I've got up, which is a Michael Jordan quote, which has been on my desk so long that it's kind of fading now. The bit where it's in the holder is bright pink and everywhere else is kind of like dull grey. But it says, if you can't stop thinking about it, don't stop working on it. And so that gives me permission for Quiet the Hive, because I know that I am in the right place doing the right thing. And even on the days where it feels really hard, that's the thing that gives me permission to go, okay, you can take it easy today, but you need to keep going. I worked with an amazing guy called Pete when I was at a large teaching trust in London, which was the hardest place I worked, but I probably learnt the most there. What we were saying earlier about working in shitty situations, but learning lessons from them. That's my place. It was amazing. But he had a Post-it note on his computer and it said, "What have I done today to help a patient or that's made a difference for a." And we weren't patient facing. So this wasn't an easy thing. It wasn't about going down and saying hello to a patient or being nice to a patient. We weren't patient facing. But that was his big why. That was his permission slip to do hard things, to have difficult conversations, to make perhaps unpopular comments or come up with new ideas and innovations, was because his thing was about, what have I done to make a difference for a patient? That. And then I think you have to have. So I've got my most recent probably permission slip I've given myself was, so I am perimenopausal and I have low days as a result. And I've more than ever, I think, I've conquered my inner critic and my imposter syndrome. I know when it's there, I know how to deal with it. I teach people about how to come over it. But actually, since being perimenopausal, it's really started to hit me quite badly. And my permission slip is, I know that I have days where I'm really, really doubting myself. And on those days, or when I know they're coming up, I have given myself permission to rearrange meetings, for example, because I know I just won't have the energy and the belief and I won't bring anything to that. So actually giving yourself permission slips to acknowledge that you know yourself best and how to get the best from you, I think is also really important.
An awesome one. I think that's so good. Oh my! And just in the perimordial thing, my mind has just gone completely blank because I was going to say something really. Oh, I know.
I'm so glad. I struggle with that all the time. I know what it was.
I was just going to share it with it. You talk about the big why. Lovely man I did some work with on branding when I was in my last corporate role. But he would talk about the BHAG, the big, hairy, audacious goal.
Nice.
which I really like. So I just thought, just for effect, I might share that with you in terms of a BHAG.
I like that. Thank you. Thank you. I've heard of gold, the giant, outrageous, liberating
Oh,
dream, but I like what was it?
the
Big,
big,
hairy,
hairy,
audacious goal.
audacious goal. It always
I
reminds
like
me a little
that.
bit of Bill and Ted's Great Adventure.
Yes.
Now
Yeah.
I'm showing
I
my
love
age a
it.
bit, but
I
there we
love
go.
it. It's all
So
good.
we are. Oh, I can hardly believe that we've been here talking, because I could stay and talk to you for hours, but we need to sort of like
It's always
round it off. I'm just wondering, because I mean, some of my last questions were about questions you're living with right now, your permission slips, which you've been very generous and already offered in. I'm guessing if there was one thing for the listeners, or one question that we haven't already alluded to, that you would want to leave listeners with, what would your hope be for that?
So I would like to share a question that I was asked once that really struck me to my core, and perhaps a question that I offer to my audiences as well. So let me start with that one. So the one I say to people when I am talking about the inner critic and the imposter syndrome, because I know that sometimes this is the stuff that stops us, right? This is the should and the wanting to perhaps be a different leader, but being told internally that you can't be, or you should be doing this, whatever. I think the big question is, who would you be without that voice in your head? Because there are so many things, I think, that some of us, we can all think of something. Oh my God, I would have said yes to this, or I shouldn't have said no to that, and I regret saying no to that, but I did it because I was scared, or I didn't think I could do it, or I didn't know how to say yes. So I think when you're struggling with saying yes or being brave, it's thinking about, who would I be without that voice in my head, and thinking what the opportunities
I
might
love
be.
that. Oh,
It's
it's
a
a
goodie,
real
isn't
good.
it? And then the one that I was asked that really shook things up for me was, I wanted to do something, and I was talking to someone about it and kind of almost giving her the reasons why I couldn't possibly do it. And she said to me, what happens if someone else does it before you do? And it was like, oh my God, I have to go now and do this thing. That was the thing that really, really got me. And quite often, when I give this example to the women I work with, I say, those times when you don't apply for a job because you think, I can't possibly do it, it's too difficult, or I haven't got all the criteria, or whatever. And then you find out who got the job that you didn't apply for and could have done standing on your head. And you think, oh my God, I would have been so much better. I know if I'd have been up against them, I would have got that job. And so the question about what if someone else does it before you, I think, is a good one to spur you on sometimes as well.
I like that a lot. Oh, Jane, thank you so much. I'm gonna end with a quote of my own, if that's all right with you.
Please do,
because this is the thing that Bridge and I have, and then I'll remember halfway through that I haven't got myself a quotation. So again, that is something up on my wall now, so that I don't forget. Otherwise, I get told off by her. So Bridget, I haven't forgotten today. Thank you very much. So the closing quote for us is by Maria Rilke, and it says, "Be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves." Rainer Maria Rilke.
That is
Be
beautiful.
patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves.
What an amazing quote to finish on, Bobby. That's really, really impressive. Thank you for sharing that.
You are an absolute joy, which is going to go in my joy jar. Maybe I should come to the retrospective at the end of the year. Oh, I'd love to, actually. But this has been absolutely wonderful. Jane, thank you so much for giving your time. And that has just been a great conversation about being the question.
Thank you so much, Bobby. It's been a joy to be here, and you're an equal joy giver. So thank you. I've really, really had a fabulous time.
Excellent.
I'll speak to you soon.
Bye. Thanks for listening. All the resources mentioned in this episode can be found on our Spotify page, so you can read, listen, watch and explore in your own time whenever you want to dig a little deeper or sit with the questions we've raised today. Next week, we're shifting gears again and stepping into the tangled world of modern leadership. Not the kind that climbs ladder, but the kind that weaves, listens and leads from wherever you are. It's going to be a conversation called Being in the Weave, and it's all about leading without the title, influencing without authority, and staying true to yourself in the messy middle of it all. So if you've ever found yourself navigating complexity, reading the room, or quietly making things happen behind the scenes, this one's for you. Join us next time for being in the weave, or maybe strategic from the middle.